In the vast expanse of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, humanity was considered the weakest link in the galactic chain. Too emotional, too stubborn, too human. But what the galaxy didn't understand was that these very traits made humans the most dangerous species of all. When pushed to the breaking point, when everything seemed lost, humans didn't surrender, they improvised, they fought dirty, and they never, ever gave up. Commander Elena Vasquez was about to prove this truth in the most unexpected way possible. Stranded on a dying space station, surrounded by hostile aliens who saw her as nothing more than a primitive primate, she would soon discover that sometimes the greatest rescue comes from the most unlikely source. And, sometimes, the hero you're looking for has been right there all along, hiding behind an alien mask, speaking in a familiar voice that would change everything she thought she knew about survival, loyalty, and what it truly means to be human in a galaxy that underestimates you at every turn. This is the story of how one confrontation in the depths of space became the spark that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity forever. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow across the observation deck of station Kepler 442b, painting everything in shades of blood and shadow. Commander Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the reinforced viewport, watching the debris field that had once been her ship drift past in a slow, hypnotic dance. The UES Defiance, humanity's most advanced exploration vessel, was now nothing more than twisted metal and scattered components floating in the cosmic void. Elena's reflection stared back at her from the glass, her dark eyes reflecting a determination that hadn't dimmed despite 3 days of captivity. Her uniform, once pristine navy blue with gold commander's stripes, was now stained with coolant fluid and torn at the shoulder where a Zephyrian guard had grabbed her too roughly during her initial processing. The taste of recycled air filled her lungs, carrying the acrid smell of failing life support systems and the underlying musk that all Zephyrian facilities seemed to possess. Behind her, the mechanical whir of the station's artificial gravity generators created a constant background hum, interrupted occasionally by the sharp crack of metal expanding and contracting under thermal stress. The station was old, probably dating back to the early days of Zephyrian expansion, and it showed. Rust stains decorated the walls like abstract art, and several wall panels had been removed to expose the maze of cables and pipes that kept the facility operational. The door to her holding area hissed open with a pneumatic wheeze, and Elena didn't bother turning around. She'd learned to recognize the distinctive 4-beat rhythm of Zephyrian footsteps, 2 primary legs and 2 stabilizing appendages that clicked against the metal floor with each step. This particular pattern belonged to Senior Interrogator Vexstar, her primary captor and the being responsible for determining her fate. "Still mourning your primitive vessel, human?" Vexstar's voice carried the characteristic whistle that came from speaking through external breathing apparatus. The Zephyrians were silicon-based life forms who required methane-rich environments, making them completely dependent on their environmental suits when dealing with carbon-based species. "You should be grateful we retrieved you from the wreckage before your life support failed completely." Elena finally turned, taking in the imposing figure of the senior interrogator. Vexstar stood nearly 8 feet tall, his environmental suit a gleaming silver that reflected the red emergency lighting. The suit's design was both functional and intimidating, with sharp angles and protruding sensor arrays that gave him the appearance of a mechanical predator. His helmet was transparent, revealing the crystalline structure of his face and the pale blue light that served as his eyes. "Grateful?" Elena's voice carried an edge of sarcasm that seemed to amuse the alien. "Is that what you call kidnapping survivors and holding them prisoner?" Vexstar's breathing apparatus released a sound that might have been laughter. "You were trespassing in restricted space, Commander Vasquez. Your vessel was engaged in unauthorized scanning of our military installations. By Galactic Council law, you are a spy." The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. The truth was more complicated than Vexstar knew, and infinitely more dangerous. The Defiance hadn't been on a spying mission, they'd been fleeing. 3 weeks ago, Elena had discovered evidence of a conspiracy that went to the highest levels of the Galactic Council itself. Documents showing secret communications between Council members and the hegemony, humanity's greatest enemy. Plans for what amounted to the systematic dismantlement of human space and the redistribution of their colonies to more suitable species. When Elena had tried to present this evidence to her superiors, she'd instead found herself marked for termination. The order had come directly from Admiral Morrison, a man she'd served under for 10 years and trusted with her life. The betrayal had been swift and brutal, an assassination attempt disguised as a routine inspection, sabotage of the ship's navigation systems, and, finally, the pursuit that had led to the Defiance's destruction in this remote sector. "I've told you repeatedly," Elena said, maintaining eye contact with Vexstar's glowing orbs, "we were conducting a routine deep space survey. Our instruments detected your station and we were investigating what we thought was a derelict facility." "Your instruments are quite sophisticated for a survey mission," Vexstar observed, moving closer with that predatory gait. "Multispectrum scanners, quantum resonance detectors, military-grade communication arrays. These are not the tools of peaceful exploration, Commander." Elena felt her jaw tighten. The senior interrogator wasn't wrong, the Defiance had been equipped with state-of-the-art intelligence-gathering equipment. But that was because Admiral Morrison had sent them on what was supposed to be a covert observation mission before Elena discovered the conspiracy. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very equipment meant to spy on humanity's enemies had instead uncovered evidence of humanity's allies betraying them. "Where I come from," Elena said carefully, "we believe in being prepared for any situation. The galaxy isn't exactly a safe neighborhood." Vexstar's environmental suit released another sound, this one distinctly unpleasant. "Indeed it is not, particularly for species that overestimate their own importance. Your people have a curious habit of assuming they belong in places they are not wanted." The comment stung because it touched on a truth Elena had been wrestling with since her capture. Humanity was still relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. In that time, they'd managed to establish dozens of colonies and trade relationships with various alien species, but they'd also made enemies. The hegemony, in particular, viewed human expansion as a threat to their own dominance in this sector of space. "Is that why you're holding me here?" Elena asked. "To send a message about humanity's place in the galaxy?" "Your fate has not yet been determined," Vexstar replied, his tone becoming more formal. "The Council is reviewing your case. Until then, you will remain our guest." "Guest?" Elena almost laughed at the euphemism. She was locked in a converted storage compartment with barely enough space to pace, fed a nutritional paste that tasted like recycled cardboard, and monitored constantly by security systems that tracked her every movement. If this was Zephyrian hospitality, she'd hate to see their prison system. As if reading her thoughts, Vexstar added, "You should consider yourself fortunate, Commander. Many of my colleagues advocate for a more direct approach to dealing with human spies. The hegemony has placed a substantial bounty on information regarding human military capabilities." The casual mention of the hegemony made Elena's blood run cold. If the Zephyrians were considering selling information about her ship and its technology to humanity's enemies, it would give the hegemony exactly what they needed to plan their next attack. Worse, if they learned about the evidence Elena had discovered regarding the conspiracy, they might move to eliminate her sources before she could expose the truth. "The hegemony pays well for human intelligence, I'm told," Vexstar continued, seemingly unaware of Elena's internal turmoil. "Your species' technological adaptations are considered quite innovative by certain parties." Elena forced herself to remain calm, but her mind was racing. She needed to escape, not just to save her own life, but to get the information she'd discovered back to Earth. Somewhere in her ship's data core, assuming it had survived the destruction, was evidence that could prevent a war or expose the traitors who were trying to start one. "What about my crew?" Elena asked, changing the subject. "You said you retrieved survivors from the wreckage." Vexstar's posture shifted slightly, a gesture Elena had learned to recognize as discomfort. "Unfortunately, you were the only survivor we were able to recover. Your ship's destruction was quite complete." The words hit Elena harder than she'd expected. She'd known logically that the rest of her crew was likely dead. The explosion that had torn apart the Defiance had been massive, visible even from this distance. But hearing it confirmed brought a fresh wave of grief and guilt. 23 souls under her command, dead because she discovered the wrong information at the wrong time. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chan, her first officer and closest friend, who'd stood by Elena even when the evidence pointed to conspiracy at the highest levels of their own command structure. Engineer's mate Rodriguez, barely out of the academy, who'd volunteered for the mission because he wanted to see the galaxy. Communications officer Tvera, the Vulcan exchange officer who'd provided crucial cultural insights during their investigation. All gone, their deaths weighing on Elena's conscience like stones. "I want to see the wreckage," Elena said suddenly. "That is not possible," Vextar replied immediately. "The debris field has been classified as a navigation hazard. Recovery operations are ongoing." Recovery operations. Elena filed that information away. It meant the Zephyrians were salvaging technology from the Defiance, probably including the data core she desperately needed to recover. If they found the encrypted files containing evidence of the conspiracy, they might not understand their significance, but they could still sell that information to the highest bidder. "How long do I have?" Elena asked bluntly. "Excuse me?" "Before you make your decision about my fate. Before you decide whether to turn me over to the hegemony or space me out an airlock." "How long do I have?" Vextar studied her for a long moment, his crystalline features unreadable behind the transparent helmet. "The Council's deliberations are expected to conclude within the standard day. Perhaps less, depending on certain external factors." External factors. Elena didn't like the sound of that. It suggested that other parties were involved in the decision, parties who might have their own agenda regarding her capture. In the meantime, Vextar continued, "I would suggest you use this time to consider your options. Cooperation with our investigation could significantly improve your circumstances." "What kind of cooperation?" "Information about human military installations, fleet positions, technological specifications. Your rank suggests you have access to strategic intelligence that would be valuable to many parties." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I took an oath to protect my species and my allies." "That oath doesn't have an expiration date." "Loyalty is an admirable quality," Vextar acknowledged, "but it becomes mere stubbornness when it serves no purpose. Your ship is destroyed, your crew is dead, and your own command structure appears to have abandoned you. To whom, exactly, are you maintaining this loyalty?" The question struck deeper than Elena wanted to admit. The truth was that her own people had betrayed her, marking her for death when she tried to expose the conspiracy. The Galactic Council, supposedly humanity's allies, were apparently complicit in the plot against them. Even her rescue by the Zephyrians had likely been motivated by opportunism rather than mercy. But Elena's loyalty had never been to institutions or governments, it had been to the ideals they were supposed to represent. Justice, protection of the innocent, the hope that different species could work together to build something better than any of them could achieve alone. Those ideals were worth fighting for, even if the organizations claiming to uphold them had been corrupted. "My loyalty," Elena said quietly, "is to the truth. And the truth is that there are forces in this galaxy working to start a war that will destroy millions of innocent lives. I won't be part of that, regardless of the consequences to myself." Vextar's breathing apparatus released a sound that might have been respect or amusement, Elena couldn't tell which. "Truth is a luxury few can afford in times like these, Commander. But I admire your conviction, even if I cannot share it." The senior interrogator turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. "There is something else you should know. We are not the only ones interested in your capture. Our sensors detected at least 3 vessels tracking your ship before its destruction, vessels that did not identify themselves or respond to our communications. It seems your presence here has attracted considerable attention." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. 3 unidentified ships could mean reinforcements from Earth coming to rescue her, but it more likely meant assassins sent to ensure she never revealed what she'd discovered. The conspiracy she'd uncovered apparently had reached far beyond what she'd initially suspected. "Who were they?" she asked. "Unknown. They departed immediately after your ship's destruction, but their sensor signatures suggest advanced stealth capabilities. Far more sophisticated than standard Galactic Council vessels. Hegemony ships," Elena realized with growing dread. They were already here, watching, waiting for their opportunity to either retrieve her or ensure her silence permanently. The conspiracy wasn't just about selling out humanity to their enemies, it was about active collaboration with the hegemony to eliminate any threats to their plan. "Think carefully about your position, Commander," Vextar said as the door began to close. "You may find that cooperation offers your only path to survival. As the door sealed shut with a final hiss, Elena was left alone with the implications of what she'd learned. The Zephyrians were considering selling her to the hegemony. Unknown ships with stealth capabilities were lurking in the area, and somewhere in the wreckage of her ship was evidence that could expose a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of the Galactic Council. Elena moved to the viewport again, staring out at the debris field that had been her ship and her crew. The emergency lights continued their rhythmic pulsing, painting everything in that ominous red glow that seemed to match her mood. She had perhaps one day before the Zephyrians made their decision, and no obvious means of escape. But Elena Vasquez hadn't survived 10 years of deep space exploration by giving up when things looked impossible. She'd survived hostile environments, equipment failures, and combat situations that would have broken lesser officers. She wasn't about to start surrendering now. Somewhere out there, in that field of twisted metal and shattered dreams, was the key to exposing the truth. And, somehow, despite being trapped on an alien station surrounded by enemies, she was going to find it. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool surface of the viewport and began to plan. The sound of approaching ships cut through the constant hum of the station's machinery like a knife through silence. Elena had been dozing fitfully when the deep thrumming of multiple engines shook her awake, vibrating through the deck plating beneath her feet. She pressed herself against the viewport, trying to get a better view of the new arrivals. 3 ships approached in a tight formation, their sleek hulls gleaming in the harsh light of the system's twin stars. Elena recognized the design immediately: hegemony interceptors, built for speed and stealth rather than heavy combat. Each vessel was roughly the size of a Earth corvette, but their advanced technology made them far more dangerous than their human counterparts. The dark metal of their hulls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving them an ominous presence against the starfield. Elena's heart sank as she watched the ships maneuver toward the station's docking ports. Vexstar's warning about unknown vessels had been accurate, but Elena had hoped they belonged to Earth forces coming to mount a rescue operation. Instead, it appeared that the hegemony had come to collect their prize personally. The lead ship was different from the others, larger, more heavily armed, with additional sensor arrays and communication equipment that marked it as a command vessel. As it drew closer, Elena could make out details of its construction that made her blood run cold. The ship bore the distinctive markings of the hegemony's intelligence division, the secretive organization responsible for their most sensitive operations. If intelligence division was here personally, it meant her situation was far worse than she'd initially thought. These weren't ordinary bounty hunters or military personnel, they were specialists in extraction, interrogation, and elimination. The fact that they'd traveled this far into Zephyrian space suggested that whatever information Elena possessed was worth considerable risk to obtain. The docking procedure was surprisingly smooth, indicating that the hegemony ships had been expected. Elena cursed under her breath as she realized the implications. The Zephyrians hadn't just been considering selling information to the hegemony, they'd already made a deal. Her capture and interrogation had been nothing more than a formality while they waited for the buyers to arrive. Within minutes of the ship's docking, Elena could hear activity in the corridors outside her holding area. The distinctive sound of hegemony combat boots, heavier and more rhythmic than Zephyrian footsteps, echoed through the station's metal passageways. Their presence seemed to bring a new energy to the facility, as if the entire station was suddenly operating at a higher state of alert. Elena moved away from the viewport and began pacing the small confines of her cell, her mind racing through possible escape scenarios. The walls were solid metal, the door was electronically locked with multiple backup systems, and the ventilation grates were too small for even someone of her relatively slight build to squeeze through. The room had clearly been designed as a holding cell, with security being the primary consideration over comfort. The sound of approaching footsteps, both hegemony and Zephyrian, caused Elena to position herself in the center of the room, facing the door with her hands clasped behind her back. She'd learned long ago that projecting confidence and composure in the face of interrogation was often the only weapon available to a prisoner. The door hissed open to reveal Vexstar, accompanied by 2 figures that made Elena's skin crawl. The hegemony operatives were tall and lean, their pale gray skin stretched tight over prominent bone structure that gave them a skeletal appearance. They wore form-fitting black uniforms with minimal insignia, but Elena could see the telltale bulges of concealed weapons and monitoring equipment. The lead operative stepped forward, his movements precise and economical. When he spoke, his voice was soft and cultured, with the slight accent that marked him as a member of the hegemony's core worlds. "Commander Elena Vasquez," he said, consulting a datapad in his hand. Age 37, 17 years of service with Earth's Deep Space Command, specialized training in intelligence gathering and xenoculture studies. Currently wanted for treason against the Galactic Council. Elena kept her expression neutral, but internally she was reeling. Treason against the Galactic Council? That charge would carry a death sentence, and it suggested that the conspiracy she'd uncovered had moved faster than she'd anticipated. Someone had already spun her discovery of evidence into an act of betrayal against the very organization she'd been trying to protect. "I am Director Kane of the Hegemony Intelligence Division," the operative continued. "I'm here to discuss the resolution of certain irregularities in your service record." "Irregularities," Elena repeated. "Is that what they're calling it now?" Director Kane's lips curved in what might have been a smile on a human face, but on his gaunt features it looked predatory. "Your recent activities have caused considerable disruption to established diplomatic relationships. The unauthorized scanning of military installations, the theft of classified information, the destruction of your own vessel to prevent capture of sensitive materials. These actions suggest a pattern of behavior inconsistent with your oath as an officer." Each accusation was technically true, but twisted to paint Elena's actions in the worst possible light. She had scanned military installations while fleeing for her life. She had accessed classified information to uncover evidence of treason. She had ultimately caused the destruction of her ship to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. "I notice you don't mention the evidence I discovered," Elena said. "The communications between Galactic Council members and hegemony representatives. The plans for the systematic dissolution of human space. The assassination orders issued against officers who might expose the conspiracy." Director Kane exchanged a look with Vexstar that Elena didn't like. "I'm afraid I have no knowledge of any such evidence, Commander. Our investigation suggests that your claims of a conspiracy were manufactured to justify your treasonous activities." Elena felt her temper flare, but forced herself to remain calm. "Then, you won't mind if I'm given the opportunity to present that evidence to an impartial tribunal?" "Unfortunately, that will not be possible," Director Kane replied smoothly. "The nature of your crimes requires immediate resolution. However, I am authorized to offer you a choice." Elena waited, knowing that whatever option she was about to be given would be carefully calculated to serve the hegemony's interests rather than her own. "You can come with us voluntarily," Director Kane continued, "and submit to a full debriefing regarding your activities and the information you accessed. In exchange, we can offer you protected status within hegemony space and the opportunity to continue your career in a more appropriate capacity." "Or?" Elena asked. "Or you can maintain your current position and face the consequences of your actions through official Galactic Council channels. I should point out that the Council has already issued preliminary findings regarding your case, and those findings are not favorable to your continued liberty." Elena understood the real choice being offered: cooperation or execution. The hegemony wanted whatever information she possessed about the conspiracy, probably so they could neutralize any remaining threats to their plan. Her protected status would likely last only as long as she remained useful to them. "I need time to consider your offer," Elena said. Director Kane checked his datapad again. "Of course. However, our schedule is somewhat constrained. We can give you 2 hours to make your decision." 2 hours. Elena's mind immediately began calculating possibilities. 2 hours wasn't enough time to mount an escape, but it might be enough time to find a way to get a message out. If she could somehow contact Earth forces or even neutral parties in the galactic community, she might be able to expose the conspiracy before the hegemony silenced her permanently. "In the meantime," Director Kane added, "I should mention that we've recovered some interesting materials from your vessel's wreckage. The data core, while damaged, contains some fascinating information about human technological capabilities." Elena's heart sank. If the hegemony had recovered the data core, they now had access to not just her evidence about the conspiracy, but also detailed information about human military technology and defensive capabilities. That intelligence alone would be worth a considerable advantage in any future conflict. However, Director Kane continued, the encryption on many of the files is quite sophisticated. We would, naturally, appreciate your assistance in accessing the complete contents. There it was, the real reason they were offering her a choice rather than simply eliminating her. They needed her to unlock the encrypted files, and they were willing to play a longer game to get that access. Elena realized that her encryption protocols, designed to protect sensitive information from enemy capture, had inadvertently become her only bargaining chip. "I'll need to see the data core," Elena said, "to verify its condition before I can provide any assistance." Director Kane's predatory smile returned. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. Security protocols, you understand. However, I can assure you that our technical specialists are quite capable of determining the extent of the damage." Elena nodded as if accepting his explanation, but her mind was working furiously. If the hegemony had the data core but couldn't access its contents, then her evidence about the conspiracy was still protected. The question was whether she could find a way to expose that information before they forced her to decrypt it. 2 hours, Elena repeated. "I'll have an answer for you then, Dot." "Excellent," Director Kane replied. "I do hope you'll make the sensible choice, Commander. The galaxy has become a dangerous place for those who insist on fighting impossible battles." As the delegation prepared to leave, Elena noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Through the viewport, she could see additional activity in the station's docking bay. Another ship had arrived, this one much smaller than the hegemony vessels. It appeared to be a maintenance craft of some kind, with the utilitarian design typical of ships used for salvage and repair operations. The ship's hull was scarred and patched in numerous places, suggesting a long service life in harsh conditions. As Elena watched, the vessel maneuvered carefully through the debris field, its pilot displaying considerable skill in navigating between the larger chunks of wreckage from the Defiance. More interesting still was the ship's registration markings. Elena couldn't make out the details at this distance, but the configuration looked familiar, similar to the independent contractor vessels that often worked the frontier regions between human and alien space. If this was indeed an independent operator, it might represent the first potential ally she'd encountered since her capture. As Director Kane and Vexstar departed, leaving Elena alone once again, she remained at the viewport watching the new arrival. The small ship had extended manipulator arms and was carefully extracting pieces of debris from the wreckage field. Whether this was part of the Zephyrian salvage operation or something else entirely, Elena couldn't tell, but she filed the information away as potentially useful. Elena settled back to wait out her 2-hour deadline, but her mind was far from idle. Somewhere in that debris field was evidence that could expose a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of the galactic community. Somewhere on this station was the technology and equipment she would need to get that evidence to the right people. And, now, somewhere in the docking bay was a small ship whose pilot might represent her best chance at escape. 2 hours wasn't much time to put together an escape plan, but Elena had worked with worse odds before. She began mentally cataloging everything she knew about the station's layout, the security systems she'd observed, and the routines of her captors. The hegemony operatives clearly expected her to make the rational choice and cooperate with their demands. They were about to learn that humans weren't always rational when their backs were against the wall. Elena moved to the door of her cell and began examining the locking mechanism more carefully than she had before. The design was typically Zephyrian, sophisticated but with certain vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with the right knowledge and tools. Unfortunately, she had neither the tools nor immediate access to the ship's systems she would need to override the locks. But she did have something else: 17 years of experience in impossible situations, training in multiple forms of combat and survival, and the stubborn human refusal to accept defeat even when victory seemed mathematically impossible. Elena began to plan, using every minute of her remaining time to prepare for what she suspected would be the most important fight of her life. Elena had been counting seconds for nearly 2 hours when the first explosion echoed through the station's corridors. The blast was distant but powerful enough to shake the deck plating beneath her feet and cause the emergency lights to flicker ominously. She pressed herself against the door of her cell, straining to hear any indication of what was happening. The explosion was followed by the distinctive wail of emergency sirens and the mechanical voice of the station's automated systems announcing hull breach protocols in the Zephyrian language. Elena's understanding of Zephyrian was limited, but she caught enough keywords to understand that something had gone seriously wrong with the station's primary power systems. More explosions followed in rapid succession, each one closer than the last. The lights failed completely for several long seconds before auxiliary power kicked in, bathing everything in the dim blue glow of backup systems. Through the viewport, Elena could see sparks and debris flying past as some kind of battle erupted in the space around the station. Elena had just begun to wonder if this was a rescue operation when the door to her cell suddenly hissed open without warning. She immediately flattened herself against the wall beside the entrance, preparing to ambush whoever came through, but no one appeared. Instead, she heard the sound of running footsteps in the corridor outside, multiple sets, moving fast and in different directions. Cautiously, Elena peered around the doorframe into the corridor. The passageway was empty but filled with smoke that stung her eyes and made breathing difficult. Emergency lights cast shifting shadows on the walls, and she could hear the distant sounds of combat energy weapons, shouted orders in multiple languages, and the distinctive whine of failing power systems. Elena didn't waste time trying to figure out who was attacking the station or why. This was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, and she intended to make the most of it. She slipped into the corridor and began moving toward what she remembered as the direction of the docking bay, staying close to the walls and pausing at each intersection to check for threats. The station's layout was more complex than she'd initially realized. Corridors branched and twisted in ways that seemed almost organic, probably a result of multiple expansions and modifications over the years. Several times she had to backtrack when passages ended in sealed blast doors or led to areas that were clearly outside her objective. As she moved deeper into the station, the sounds of combat grew louder and more chaotic. Elena could distinguish at least 3 different types of energy weapons being fired, suggesting that the conflict involved multiple factions rather than a simple two-sided battle. This complicated her situation considerably. She needed to reach the docking bay without getting caught in the crossfire between unknown combatants. At the next intersection, Elena nearly walked into a running firefight between Zephyrian security forces and attackers in unfamiliar armor. She pressed herself into an alcove just as a group of the attackers rounded the corner, their weapons charging with the distinctive whine of military-grade energy rifles. The attackers were humanoid but clearly not human, taller than Earth standard, with elongated limbs and armor that seemed to shift and adapt to their movements. Their helmets were featureless except for a single red optical sensor that swept back and forth as they searched for targets. Elena had never seen their like before, but their professional movements and advanced equipment marked them as serious combatants. The firefight lasted only minutes, but it was intense and brutal. The Zephyrian security forces were clearly outmatched by their attackers' superior weapons and tactics. When the shooting stopped, Elena counted at least 6 Zephyrian casualties and no losses among the unknown attackers. This was not a rescue operation, this was a military assault by a force that knew exactly what they were doing. Elena waited until the attackers had moved on before emerging from her hiding place. The corridor was now littered with debris and filled with the acrid smell of burned circuitry and worse things she didn't want to identify. She stepped carefully around the casualties, pausing only to check one of the fallen Zephyrian guards for anything useful. The guard's sidearm was a standard Zephyrian energy pistol, designed for use by silicon-based lifeforms but adaptable to human physiology with minor adjustments. Elena checked the weapon's charge and power settings before holstering it under her torn uniform jacket. It wasn't much, but it was better than being completely unarmed. As she continued toward the docking bay, Elena began to piece together what might be happening. The attackers were clearly not hegemony forces, their equipment and tactics were too different. They might be mercenaries hired by someone with an interest in the station's contents, or they could be representatives of another faction entirely. Either way, their presence complicated her escape plans considerably. The corridor leading to the docking bay was filled with smoke so thick that Elena had to feel her way along the walls. The acrid fumes made her eyes water and her throat burn, but she pressed forward, knowing that time was running out. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the unknown attackers systematically moving through the station, and she had no desire to encounter them again. When Elena finally reached the docking bay, she found it in chaos. Emergency lighting cast weird shadows across the large space, and several of the docked ships showed signs of damage from the ongoing battle. The 3 hegemony interceptors were still in their berths, but their hatches were sealed and their engines cold. Apparently their crews were involved in defending the station rather than preparing for departure. More interesting was the small maintenance ship she'd observed earlier. It was still in the process of docking, its pilot apparently having decided that discretion was the better part of valor and returning to the station when the fighting started. As Elena watched from the shadows of a support pillar, the ship's airlock cycled open and a figure in a maintenance suit stepped out. The figure was humanoid but completely concealed within an environmental suit that could have belonged to any of a dozen different species. The suit was old and patched in multiple places, with the kind of wear that came from years of hard use in dangerous environments. What caught Elena's attention, however, was the way the figure moved, with a confidence and economy of motion that suggested combat training rather than simple mechanical expertise. Elena made her decision quickly. The maintenance ship represented her best chance of escape, and its pilot might be neutral in whatever conflict was tearing the station apart. She began moving carefully through the shadows of the docking bay, using the various pieces of equipment and cargo containers as cover. She had almost reached the maintenance ship when everything went wrong at once. The unknown attackers burst into the docking bay from multiple entrances, their weapons already firing at targets Elena couldn't see. The figure in the maintenance suit immediately dove for cover behind a cargo container, drawing what appeared to be a military-grade weapon from concealment within their toolkit. Elena found herself caught in the open, with hostile forces converging on her position from 3 different directions. Elena drew the Zephyrian pistol and fired at the nearest group of attackers, her shots going wide in the chaotic lighting conditions. The energy bolts illuminated the bay in brief, brilliant flashes that only added to the confusion. She rolled behind a piece of loading equipment just as return fire scored the deck where she'd been standing. The maintenance worker had taken up a position behind a fuel storage unit and was laying down surprisingly effective covering fire with what Elena now recognized as a human-manufactured assault rifle. The weapon's distinctive sound was completely out of place in this alien environment, and Elena felt a surge of hope at the possibility that she wasn't alone after all. But the hope was short-lived. The attackers had superior numbers, better weapons, and what appeared to be detailed knowledge of the station's layout. They began systematically suppressing Elena's position while flanking maneuvers cut off her possible escape routes. Within minutes, she found herself pinned down with nowhere to run. Elena was checking the charge on her weapon when she heard a familiar voice calling her name. "Commander Vasquez. This way." The voice was speaking English with an accent she couldn't quite place, but the language itself was unmistakably human. Elena looked toward the source of the voice and saw the maintenance worker gesturing frantically from behind their cover. The figure had removed their helmet, revealing a human face beneath the environmental suit. Elena didn't hesitate. She broke from cover and ran toward the maintenance worker, firing suppressing shots at the attackers as she moved. Energy bolts sizzled past her head, close enough that she could feel their heat, but somehow none of them found their target. The maintenance worker provided covering fire as Elena reached their position, then immediately began moving toward their ship. "Move. We've got maybe 30 seconds before they flank us." Elena followed without question, grateful to have found an ally in this desperate situation. The maintenance worker's ship was only 20 meters away, but it might as well have been 20 kilometers with the volume of fire being directed at their position. "There," the maintenance worker shouted, pointing to a service tunnel that ran along the edge of the docking bay. "We can reach my ship through the maintenance crawlways." Elena nodded and followed as the worker led them into the narrow tunnel. The space was barely large enough for a human to crawl through, filled with pipes and cables that made movement difficult and slow. Behind them, Elena could hear the attackers discovering their escape route and beginning pursuit. The crawlway seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the bowels of the station in ways that made Elena's sense of direction completely useless. Several times they had to stop and wait while the maintenance worker consulted a portable scanner, apparently checking for the safest route through the maze of passages. Finally, they emerged through a maintenance hatch directly into the maintenance ship's cargo hold. Elena had never been so grateful to see the inside of a spacecraft, even one as cramped and cluttered as this one. The worker immediately began powering up the ship's systems while Elena sealed the hatch behind them. "Strap in," the worker called from the cockpit. "This is going to be rough." Elena found a passenger seat and quickly secured the safety restraints as the ship's engines came online with a deep thrumming that she could feel in her bones. Through the viewports, she could see the attackers emerging into the docking bay, their weapons searching for targets. The maintenance ship lifted off with surprising smoothness, considering the pilot was operating under combat conditions. Elena watched the station fall away beneath them as they accelerated toward open space, leaving behind the chaotic battle that continued to rage in the corridors and docking bays. Only when they were well clear of the station did Elena finally allow herself to relax slightly. She looked toward the cockpit where the maintenance worker was checking instruments and setting course for some unknown destination. "Thank you," Elena called forward. "I don't know who you are, but you probably saved my life back there." The worker looked back at her, and Elena could see their face more clearly in the better lighting of the cockpit. The features were definitely human male, probably in his 40s, with the weathered look that came from years of exposure to recycled air and artificial lighting. "You can thank me later," he replied. "Right now we need to figure out what the hell is going on out here and why half the galaxy seems to want you dead." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. This man knew more about her situation than a simple maintenance worker should. His ship, his weapons, his knowledge of the station's layout, none of it fit the cover story he'd been presenting. "Who are you?" Elena asked carefully, her hand moving toward the weapon she'd taken from the station. The man's eyes met hers in the reflection of the cockpit glass, and Elena saw something there that made her breath catch in her throat. The eyes were brown, warm, and completely familiar despite the fact that she was certain she'd never seen this man before in her life. "That's a long story," he said. "And, before I tell it, there's something you need to know about that data core the hegemony recovered from your ship." Elena felt her blood turn to ice. "How do you know about the data core?" The man turned in his pilot's seat to face her fully, and, when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he knew far more about her situation than seemed possible. "Because I'm the one who put the evidence you discovered into that data core in the first place. And I've been waiting 3 years for someone like you to find it." Elena stared at the man in the pilot's seat, her mind reeling from his revelation. The weapon in her hand felt suddenly heavy as she processed what he just told her. The evidence that had destroyed her career, gotten her crew killed, and led to her capture, he was claiming responsibility for planting it. "That's impossible," Elena said slowly. "The data I found was in classified files accessible only to senior command staff." "You're a maintenance worker on a salvage ship." The man's smile was sad and knowing. "Cover identities are a necessary evil in this line of work, Commander. And, as for the classified files, well, when you've been dead for 3 years according to official records, you learn to work with whatever access you can arrange." Dead for 3 years. Elena felt pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed beginning to fall into place. "You're saying you're supposed to be dead?" "Officially, yes. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Chen died in a transport accident while returning from a classified assignment. His body was never recovered due to the unfortunate destruction of the vessel and all aboard." The man's voice carried a bitter edge. "Very tidy, very final. No questions asked." "Chun." Elena's breath caught as the implications hit her. "Sarah's brother. Sarah Chen, my first officer." She mentioned having a brother in intelligence, but he was supposed to be dead. Marcus nodded gravely. "Sarah never knew the truth about what happened to me. It was safer for her that way until she started asking questions about your investigation. Then, it became a liability that certain people couldn't tolerate." Elena felt as if the deck had dropped out from under her. "Sarah is dead because of her connection to you?" "Sarah is dead because she trusted the wrong people with information about what you'd discovered," Marcus replied. "Just like you trusted Admiral Morrison with evidence of the conspiracy. The difference is that I've been tracking this network for 3 years, and I know who can and can't be trusted." Elena's mind was spinning with questions, but the most immediate one demanded an answer. "How did you know I would be at that station?" Marcus turned back to his controls and began inputting a new course. "I've been monitoring hegemony intelligence communications for months. When I learned they were planning to intercept a human officer who'd accessed certain classified files, I put the pieces together. There weren't many people with both the security clearance and the integrity to act on what you found. So you came to rescue me? I came to rescue the evidence, Marcus said bluntly. You were a bonus. The data core from your ship contains information that 3 years of undercover work couldn't uncover. If the hegemony gets access to those files, a lot of good people are going to die. Elena absorbed this with a mixture of gratitude and resentment. She was grateful to be free, but the idea that her value was secondary to the information she carried stung. What exactly did you put in those files? What evidence is so important that you've been willing to stay dead for 3 years? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on the navigation display. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I was part of a joint intelligence operation, humans, Zephyrians, and several other species working together to monitor hegemony expansion in this sector. What we discovered was that the expansion wasn't random. They were following a plan provided by someone with detailed knowledge of Galactic Council defensive positions. Elena felt a chill of recognition. Someone on the Council was feeding them intelligence. Not just someone. Multiple someones, at the highest levels. Admiral Morrison, 3 Galactic Council representatives, 2 sector governors, and at least a dozen other officials across human and allied space. Marcus's hands tightened on the controls. They'd been systematically feeding information to the hegemony for at least 5 years, maybe longer. Why? Elena asked. What could they possibly gain from betraying their own species? Marcus laughed bitterly. Power, money, survival, the usual reasons for treason. The hegemony promised them positions in the new order they're planning to establish. Key worlds, trade routes, military commands. They think they'll be ruling alongside the hegemony instead of being crushed beneath them. Elena thought about the documents she'd discovered, remembering the careful language and coded references that had made her suspicious in the first place. The communications I found, they were just the tip of the iceberg, weren't they? What you found was 3 months of routine coordination messages, Marcus confirmed. Schedules for ship movements, defensive updates, personnel transfers. The kind of information that seems innocent enough on its own, but becomes devastating when you realize it's being passed to an enemy. Elena understood now why her discovery had triggered such a violent response. She hadn't just uncovered evidence of treason, she'd stumbled onto a conspiracy that had been years in the making. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, involving people she'd trusted and institutions she'd devoted her life to serving. The attack on the station, Elena said. Who were those attackers? Marcus checked his instruments before answering. Mercenaries, hired by someone who wanted to ensure that neither you nor the evidence you carried would reach Earth. I suspect they were meant to kill everyone aboard the station and destroy all evidence of what happened there. But why attack the station at all? The hegemony already had what they wanted. Because someone panicked, Marcus replied. When you were captured, it set off alarm bells throughout the conspiracy network. Too many people knew about your investigation, too many questions were being asked. The decision was made to eliminate all loose ends. Elena thought about Director Kane and his polite offers of cooperation. The hegemony operative who interrogated me seemed confident they could decrypt the files without my help. They probably could, given enough time. But time is something they don't have anymore. Your investigation has already started to unravel their network. Other officers are asking questions, conducting their own inquiries. The conspiracy is falling apart faster than they can contain it. Marcus adjusted their course again, and Elena noticed they were heading toward what appeared to be an asteroid field at the edge of the system. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, hopefully. I've got a base of operations hidden in those asteroids, shielded from most scanning systems and stocked with everything we'll need to get that evidence to the right people. Elena studied Marcus's profile as he piloted the ship through the increasingly dense asteroid field. There was something about his features that reminded her strongly of Sarah, particularly around the eyes and the set of his jaw. Sarah had mentioned her brother occasionally, always with a mixture of pride and sadness that Elena now understood. Sarah really thought you were dead, Elena said quietly. Marcus's hands tightened on the controls again. I know. I wanted to tell her the truth, but contact with anyone from my old life would have compromised the mission. The people I was investigating had resources throughout human space, communications were monitored, movements were tracked. Any connection to my past identity could have gotten both of us killed. She would have understood. Sarah was always proud of the work you did for intelligence. Sarah was also stubborn as hell and would have tried to help whether I wanted her to or not, Marcus replied with a slight smile. That trait apparently ran in the family. She died because she couldn't let go of questions about your investigation, even when it became dangerous to keep asking them. Elena felt a surge of grief and guilt. Sarah had died because she'd been loyal to her commander and curious about the conspiracy Elena had uncovered. If Elena had been more careful about who she'd trusted with the information, her friend might still be alive. The ship shuddered slightly as Marcus navigated between two massive asteroids, their surfaces scarred by impacts and cosmic radiation. Elena could see the entrance to what appeared to be a natural cave system carved into one of the larger rocks. Impressive, Elena commented as Marcus guided them into the hidden facility. 3 years of preparation, Marcus replied. I needed somewhere the conspiracy couldn't find me while I gathered evidence. This place is completely off any official charts and shielded against most forms of detection. The interior of the asteroid base was surprisingly spacious and well-equipped. Elena could see living quarters, a workshop area, and what appeared to be a sophisticated communications center. Banks of computer equipment lined the walls, their displays showing various data streams and monitoring systems. As they docked, Elena noticed several other ships in the hangar bay, all of them bearing the anonymous markings of independent contractors or salvage operations. You're not working alone. Not anymore, Marcus confirmed as he shut down their ship's engines. Over the past year, I've made contact with others who've noticed irregularities in their chains of command. People who've asked the wrong questions and found themselves reassigned to dangerous postings. We've been building a network of our own. Elena followed Marcus through the ship's airlock into the base proper. The artificial gravity was set to Earth normal, and the air quality was better than she'd experienced in weeks. After the cramped conditions of the Zephyrian station and the maintenance ship, the space felt luxuriously open. How many others? Elena asked. Currently, 17 active operatives across human and allied space. Each one carefully vetted and trusted with only the information they need to perform their assigned tasks. The conspiracy has taught us the value of compartmentalization. As they moved through the facility, Elena noticed several people working at various stations, some human, others belonging to species she recognized as Galactic Council allies. Their presence suggested that the conspiracy Marcus was fighting wasn't limited to human space. Commander Vasquez, Marcus said as they approached the communications center, I'd like you to meet someone who's been very eager to speak with you. At the main communications console, a woman turned around, and Elena felt her heart skip a beat. The woman was elderly, probably in her 70s, with gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. More importantly, Elena recognized her immediately from intelligence briefings and news reports. Admiral Catherine Reyes, the woman introduced herself with a slight smile. Retired, and, according to most official sources, currently enjoying a quiet life on a farming colony in the Centauri system. Elena's mind reeled. Admiral Reyes had been one of Earth's most decorated officers, a hero of the first hegemony conflicts and a key figure in establishing the current defense agreements with the Galactic Council. She'd retired 5 years ago amid rumors of disagreements with the civilian leadership over military policy. Admiral, it's an honor, Elena managed. Though I have to ask, what are you doing here? Admiral Reyes's smile became grimmer. Same thing you are, Commander. Fighting a war that most people don't know exists yet. Marcus has been keeping me informed about your investigation, and, I have to say, you've uncovered evidence that confirms some very disturbing suspicions. Elena looked between Marcus and the Admiral, beginning to understand the scope of what she'd stumbled into. This isn't just about exposing a conspiracy, is it? You're building a resistance movement. We prefer to think of it as preserving the legitimate chain of command, Admiral Reyes replied. When the institutions that are supposed to protect you have been compromised, you have to work outside those institutions. The question is whether you're prepared to join us in that work. Elena thought about her destroyed ship, her dead crew, and the evidence that could prevent a war that would destroy millions of lives. She thought about Sarah, who'd died asking the right questions, and about the betrayal that reached to the highest levels of the government she'd sworn to serve. "What do you need me to do?" Elena asked. Admiral Reyes and Marcus exchanged a look that suggested they'd been planning for this moment. "First, we need to decrypt and analyze the complete contents of your data core. Then, we need to get that information to people who can act on it, people we know aren't part of the conspiracy." "And, after that?" Marcus's expression became deadly serious. "After that, Commander, we go to war. Not the war the conspiracy is trying to start between humanity and the hegemony, but the war we have to fight to save both our species from the real enemy." Elena looked around the facility again, seeing it now not as a hiding place but as a command center for a shadow war that had been going on for years. She was no longer just a refugee trying to expose a conspiracy, she was being recruited into a resistance movement that might be humanity's only hope for survival. "When do we start?" Elena asked. The data core from the Defiance lay in the center of the workshop like a technological artifact from a lost civilization. The device was smaller than Elena had expected, barely larger than her fist, but its contents represented 3 years of painstaking intelligence gathering and the key to exposing a conspiracy that threatened the survival of multiple species. Elena watched as Marcus worked to interface the damaged core with the base's computer systems. His hands moved with the precision of someone intimately familiar with both human and alien technology, connecting cables and adjusting settings with practiced ease. The tools he used were a mixture of Earth-manufactured equipment and devices she didn't recognize, probably acquired during his years undercover. "The encryption is holding," Marcus reported as streams of data began flowing across multiple displays. "Whatever hit your ship didn't damage the core's primary memory banks. The security protocols you implemented are still intact." Elena felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The encryption she'd used was military grade, designed to protect sensitive information even in the event of capture. But it also meant that accessing the files would require her personal authorization codes that she'd hoped never to use under these circumstances. Admiral Reyes approached the workstation, her expression grave. "Commander, before you unlock those files, there's something else you need to understand about the situation we're facing." Elena looked up from the data core. "What do you mean?" "The conspiracy we've uncovered isn't just about selling information to the hegemony," the Admiral explained. "It's about fundamentally reshaping the power structure of this entire sector of space. The people involved aren't just traders, they're architects of a new order that they believe will bring stability and prosperity to the galaxy." Elena frowned. "Stability through conquest and subjugation?" "Stability through control," Marcus interjected without looking up from his work. "The hegemony has convinced these people that the current system is too chaotic, too democratic. They've been promised positions in a more organized galactic government." Admiral Reyes nodded grimly. "What makes this particularly dangerous is that some of the people involved genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. They've convinced themselves that sacrificing human independence is a small price to pay for galactic peace." Elena thought about Admiral Morrison and the others she'd trusted who had apparently betrayed not just her, but their entire species. They really think the hegemony will honor their agreements? "History suggests otherwise," the Admiral replied. "But people have a remarkable capacity for believing what they want to believe, especially when the alternative is admitting they've been used." Marcus straightened up from the workstation, wiping his hands on a cloth. "The interface is ready. Commander, we'll need your authorization codes to proceed." Elena moved to the console and placed her palm on the biometric scanner. The device hummed for a moment as it verified her identity, then prompted her for the verbal authorization code. She hesitated, knowing that once she spoke the words, there would be no going back. "Authorization code Omega 77 Delta," Elena said clearly. The computer processed her voice pattern and codes, then began unlocking file after file of encrypted data. As the information flowed across the displays, Elena realized that Marcus had been understating the scope of what they'd discovered. "My God," Admiral Reyes breathed as she scanned the emerging data. "This goes back at least 8 years. They've been planning this since before the last hegemony conflicts ended." Elena stared at the communications logs, financial records, and strategic planning documents that filled the screens. The conspiracy involved dozens of high-ranking officials across multiple species, all coordinating to gradually weaken the Galactic Council's ability to resist hegemony expansion. "Look at this," Marcus said, highlighting a particular communication thread. "They've been manipulating trade routes, defense allocations, even diplomatic negotiations to create strategic vulnerabilities the hegemony can exploit." Elena followed the thread of messages, her horror growing as she realized the implications. They've been engineering the conflicts themselves, creating the very instability they claim the hegemony will solve. "It's brilliant, in a twisted way," Admiral Reyes admitted. "Create the problem, then position yourself as the solution. By the time people realize what's happening, they're desperate enough to accept any alternative to chaos." As they continued to analyze the data, Elena noticed something that made her blood run cold. "Marcus, look at this timestamp. This message was sent 2 days after the Defiance left Earth." Marcus examined the file Elena was indicating. It was a communication from Admiral Morrison to a hegemony contact, providing detailed information about the ship's mission, crew complement, and planned route. They weren't just tracking your investigation, Marcus realized. They were using it. Your ship was meant to be captured, the evidence was meant to be discovered by the hegemony, and, then, discredited as fabricated intelligence. Elena felt sick as the full scope of her manipulation became clear. The whole mission was a setup. They wanted me to find evidence of the conspiracy so they could frame me as a traitor and discredit anything I might reveal. "Except you were more resourceful than they anticipated," Admiral Reyes observed. "Instead of being quietly captured, you fought back, complicated their plans, and ultimately led us to intelligence they never intended to be exposed." Marcus was already working on another set of files. "There's more here. Financial records, shipping manifests, personnel transfers, they've been moving pieces into place for a major operation." Elena leaned in to study the data more closely. What she saw made her stomach drop. These are invasion plans. The hegemony isn't just planning to expand, they're planning to launch simultaneous attacks on key human and allied worlds. "When?" Admiral Reyes demanded. Marcus traced through multiple files, cross-referencing dates and operational timelines. "Based on these logistics reports, 3 weeks, maybe less. They're already moving forces into position." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 3 weeks wasn't enough time to alert the proper authorities, investigate the conspiracy, and mount an effective defense. Especially when many of the people who should be organizing the defense were actively working for the enemy. "We need to get this information to someone who can act on it immediately," Elena said. "Someone we know isn't compromised." Admiral Reyes was already moving toward the communications center. "I still have contacts throughout the military, people I've known for decades. But we'll need to be careful, any communication could be intercepted by the conspiracy." "Not necessarily," Marcus said thoughtfully. "I've been monitoring their communication networks for months. I know which channels they're watching and which ones they've ignored. There are still some people in positions of authority who've stayed off their radar." Elena watched as the Admiral and Marcus began discussing communication protocols and potential contacts. The weight of what they'd discovered was overwhelming, a conspiracy involving dozens of high-ranking officials, a planned invasion that would devastate multiple worlds, and evidence that the very institutions meant to protect them had been corrupted from within. But, as she studied the data flowing across the displays, Elena also saw something else: patterns in the conspiracy's communications, weaknesses in their planning, opportunities for disruption. The people involved might have been planning this operation for years, but they'd also grown overconfident, leaving trails and creating vulnerabilities they didn't realize existed. "Admiral," Elena said, interrupting the discussion of communication strategies. "I think we're approaching this wrong." Both the Admiral and Marcus looked at her. "What do you mean?" "We're thinking about this as a problem of getting information to the right people," Elena continued. "But what if we don't wait for authorization? What if we act on the information ourselves?" Marcus frowned. "Commander, we're talking about preventing a major military operation. That's beyond our capabilities." "Is it?" Elena challenged. "Look at these logistics reports. The hegemony's invasion plan depends on precise coordination between multiple fleets, synchronized attacks on specific targets, and the element of surprise. Disrupt any one of those elements, and the entire operation becomes vulnerable. Admiral Reyes studied the data with renewed interest. The coordination points, they're all listed here. Communication relays, supply depots, staging areas. Exactly, Elena said. We don't need to fight the entire hegemony fleet. We just need to create enough chaos in their logistics network to delay the invasion long enough for the real authorities to respond. Marcus was already pulling up tactical displays. It would be incredibly dangerous. We're talking about direct action against heavily defended military targets. With what? Admiral Reyes asked. We have 17 people and a handful of ships. The hegemony has battle fleets. Elena smiled grimly. We have something they don't expect: detailed intelligence about their plans, and the knowledge that we're already dead according to their records. They won't be watching for threats from people who don't officially exist. Marcus and Admiral Reyes exchanged a look. Elena could see them weighing the risks against the potential rewards, calculating odds that probably weren't in their favor. The communication relay at Kepler Station, Marcus said slowly. If we could take that out, it would disrupt coordination for at least 6 hours while they rerouted through backup systems. Long enough for us to hit 2 or 3 other targets, Elena added. Create a cascade failure that would push their timeline back by weeks. Admiral Reyes studied the tactical displays for several minutes before speaking. It's insane. We'd be taking on the entire hegemony intelligence apparatus with a resistance cell that most people think is a conspiracy theory. Elena thought about Sarah and the rest of her crew, about the evidence of betrayal that reached to the highest levels of their own government, about the millions of innocent lives that would be lost if the invasion proceeded as planned. Admiral, Elena said quietly, what's the human saying about extraordinary times? The elderly woman's eyes glinted with something that might have been admiration or madness. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. Marcus was already moving toward the equipment lockers. If we're going to do this, we'll need to move fast. Once we start hitting their targets, they'll know someone is actively working against them. How long do we have? Elena asked. Based on their operational timeline, we need to begin disrupting their logistics within 48 hours, Admiral Reyes calculated. After that, they'll have enough forces in position to proceed even with degraded communications. Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with facing impossible odds. This was what she trained for during 17 years of service, the moment when everything depended on a small group of dedicated people willing to risk everything for something greater than themselves. Marcus, Elena said as she watched him prepare equipment, there's something I need to ask you. He looked up from the weapons he was checking. What's that? Your sister, Sarah. Would she approve of what we're about to do? Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since Elena had met him, the expression was genuinely warm. Sarah always said that sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody else knows you're fighting. She would have been proud to be part of this. Elena nodded, feeling a sense of closure about her friend's death. Sarah had died because she'd been loyal and curious and unwilling to let important questions go unanswered. In a way, what they were about to attempt was the completion of her investigation. Admiral Reyes activated the facility's main communications system. All stations, all operatives. This is Admiral Reyes with priority authorization codes Alpha 77. We are initiating Operation Daybreak effective immediately. All personnel report to battle stations and prepare for coordinated action against designated hegemony targets. Elena watched as responses came in from across the facility and from distant locations throughout human and allied space. People she'd never met, working under covers she'd never suspected, all united by the knowledge that their legitimate governments had been compromised and their survival depended on their own actions. As the base transformed from a hidden refuge into a military command center, Elena realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented, the birth of a human resistance movement that might be the last hope for preventing an interstellar war. The galaxy was about to learn that when humans were backed into a corner with no legal recourse and no legitimate authority to appeal to, they didn't surrender. They improvised, they fought dirty, and they never, ever gave up. The hegemony had been planning their invasion for years, but they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd forgotten that the most dangerous human was one who had nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. Elena checked her equipment one final time and prepared to show them exactly what that meant.